District 47 isn't Indianapolis, and it sure in the heck isn't Louisville suburbs. This is Harrison County, Washington County, and most of Floyd County, where small towns carry big histories, and every mile of road tells a different story. You've got places where internet still crawls like it's 1999, and places where rural hospitals have barely survived closures. You've got farmers fighting rising costs, teachers fighting shrinking budgets, and families fighting to stay in the communities they grew up in. And through it all, District 47 has been stuck with a state house that treats those counties like a political afterthought, unless it's election season. Infrastructure promises go unfulfilled. The Ohio River keeps catching environmental runoff, and the economic development that should be happening here keeps landing somewhere else. But the people of 47 aren't asking for a miracle. They're asking for someone who actually shows up, someone who listens, someone who fights. Today, we're talking to a candidate who says he's ready to do just that. Today, we are joined by Ethan Sweetland-May, candidate for Indiana State Senate District 47. Ethan knows the district because he lives it, a region that spans from the rolling hills of Harrison County through the historic communities of Washington County, all the way to the neighborhoods and towns across most of Floyd. Ethan has been outspoken about the issues that hit this district hardest: expanding reliable rural broadband, protecting the Ohio River watershed, bringing real investment to small town infrastructure, strengthening public schools, and ensuring that local workers, farmers, and families aren't forgotten in the shuffle of state house politics. What makes Ethan stand out is that he's part of a new wave of Hoosiers who aren't waiting for permission to lead. He's not taking corporate PAC money. He's not playing insider games. He's running because 47 deserves representation that looks forward instead of settling for the status quo. And there could not be a better human being to run for this position. So let's get into this conversation. Ethan, welcome to Hold 'em Accountable.
Thanks so much, Derek. That was a hell of an intro, man. I appreciate you.
So let's get into the weeds here. District 47 includes both growing suburban communities and deeply rural areas. What do you see as the most significant challenge facing this district right now, and how will you prioritize it in your first legislative session?
Yeah. So I uniquely connected to all of these areas because I served on a garbage truck in this district for 11 years, a rural garbage truck. So every week I would end up in Mockport and I would end up just south of Salem. I would be out to the west of Corydon and I'd be in all around New Albany. So when you talk about the urban and suburban areas, I've literally been in those neighborhoods, see the houses, whether they're the new builds that start at $400,000 a pop, or whether it's these little communities outside of Livonia where the normal thing is to see tarps on roofs. And I think that one of the biggest challenges facing our district can really be summed up as saying that there's uneven growth, right? You have lots of focus and development in a few areas, and then you have a lot of other areas that are just, as you mentioned, largely forgotten and ignored. And there's a lot of causes for that, not the least of which is we see the centralization of farmland in the hands of a few big concerns. And so we have communities where there used to be 50 farmers in the area, and now there are really only 4 or 5 that still farm the land. And so when you think about, if you only have 5 families that are still farming and 45 aren't, that means they're not there anymore. And then you're talking about less tax revenue for investment, less income to actually, and less things to actually the stores that feed those families, the little shops that they would be at. All of their customers are gone, and it's part of the slow decay of rural America that we keep seeing. And that's a big issue for big tracts of District 47. And of course, you mentioned broadband. I was just this past week, I had a town hall out in Campbellsburg, Indiana, and Internet access is a big deal as soon as you get off the highway. Most people don't drink the tap water. It's not like the quality is so low. And the roads, as soon as you get off the highway, start deteriorating so quickly out in Washington County and many parts of Floyd County, even. And so I want to see. I want to see legislation. I want to support legislation. Next level connection broadband is the Indiana program that's pushing that. I think there's a lot of good that they're doing, but funding is always an issue. Working with the community to get support on board instead of just like trying to shove these projects in the way that is most convenient for the state is a big issue, which of course comes down to representation and people actually being in the community, meeting with people, helping build consensus and build a momentum to demand it. And then, of course, we need to coordinate land use. We need to, which is what I was talking about. It's like if you're going to dig up stuff, if you're going to dig up the roadways and put in broadband, if you're going to do infrastructure projects like better water, these are things that require consensus. And more than that, they require organization. One of the things I think that we've really missed with our political process is that we tend to pick politicians like heroes or pick politicians to be champions. It's like, yeah, now you go do it. And then the politician is either a really good politician and they do their very best and they get some other stuff and they don't get other stuff. Or more typically, they go end up, caucusing with their party. They do the things that the party does. And maybe once in a while they get a legislative bone thrown their way. I want to be a politician that is primarily an organizer. I want to be a politician that primarily helps people recognize that this is your power. You are the power in your community. You standing shoulder to shoulder with your neighbor and saying, there are 5,000 of us around Campbellsburg. And if we show up in force and say our water isn't drinkable, and we, after 10 years of trying to get broadband out to Livonia, we don't have it still, that is power when you stand together. And I want to be primarily an organizer. Like I want to lead by organizing these communities. So when we talk about the challenges, the main challenge we face is how disorganized and how demoralized our communities are about believing that change is possible and that thinking that they have a role in making that change. And as a state senate, as a state senator, that's one of the main things I want to do. I want to help connect people to each other and help them see that this is your fight and you have the power to do something about it. And I can help you get where you need to be. I can show you who has been taking that power from you, who has been trying to make your role in this invisible and seem impossible. And I can help direct you where you need to go to get the change you deserve. So that's what I see my role as state senator. And I really believe that's the biggest challenge that our district faces. Any particular issue, and there are dozens of them, boil down to an imbalance in power. And that imbalance in power is protected by people who want to make it invisible to the everyday person and make it seem impossible to do something about it. And that's something we should be doing as legislators.
Residents in Floyd and Clark counties continue to debate infrastructure needs, from rural broadband gaps to major roadway congestion near 64 and State Road 62. What infrastructure projects should be prioritized and how will you secure funding?
So really, really important. Anybody's major beef, if you talk about them on a given day, at least 1 in 3 that I end up on the phone with talk about traffic. A lot of these highways like Interstate 64, but also the rural highways like 62, like you're saying, right off the interstate, they're being targeted everywhere for these big builds, right? Big apartment buildings going up, new subdivisions going in, and the congestion that results, everybody in the area feels it. And so when we're talking about how we have to support infrastructure, Indiana in many ways still has like several decades ago approach to dealing with traffic. We see traffic lights go in, we make bigger shoulders on the highways, and that just it adds to congestion and makes people drive faster. We end up continuing to incentivize the thing that is creating the problem, which is we have communities springing up where the people sleep there and they don't live there. And so they're always leaving to go somewhere else. And so the traffic is a constant problem. These are like, you take Highway 62, for example. we're talking about Georgetown, we're talking about Edwardsville. These are beautiful little towns, many of which have gone through decades of fighting, the rural decline, seeing people move out of the community, move closer to New Albany. And we need to invest in infrastructure. We need to help with congestion. There are people get mad about roundabouts, and I understand that. They're still new to us here in Indiana, but they everywhere you put in a roundabout, traffic fatalities go down. Traffic slows down and people pay more attention when they're driving. So if you're looking to bring down traffic fatalities, which is of course a huge problem, if you're looking to make traffic safer, you need to not make them look like race car tracks out there. Everybody wants to do 60 miles an hour in a 40. But the other thing we need to do is create the other part of infrastructure, which is incentivizing businesses, incentivizing stores, incentivizing recreation in these areas, so that the first answer to the question, well, what are we going to do tonight, isn't drive to Clarksville, isn't drive to Louisville. It's we're going to stay in Georgetown. We don't need to drive into town because we have the things we want not too far away from us. And that speaks to like a change we have to make as planners, where we aren't just responding to the inevitable pull of big corporations that want box stores and they want commercial zoning and they want it all in one area. And so you end up with a place like Clarksville and places like Jeffersonville that just are zoning all this old farmland into commercial, builds them up, gives them tax bases, and pulls all the money and investment into these other areas instead of keeping it in communities where people are actually living, where they're building subdivisions, where they're putting in new apartment buildings. We need to focus on attracting local investors, local business people, and helping them build the infrastructure that actually creates more tax revenue, it creates more interest in the community, and it creates more cohesion and cuts down on traffic because people aren't always going and coming from the place they sleep and the place they work and live and do recreation. I think that is often not talked about when we talk about these infrastructure problems, that we have traffic problems because people are always on the road. And when we ask why are people always on the road, the solutions to getting them off the road and into more walkable areas into their towns is about reinvesting in rural communities, reinvesting in small towns. And when we do that, everywhere we see that actually happen, it makes people want to stay. It makes people want to be home. That's the solution that takes more patience and takes more investment. But I think that's the solution that we need to actually make a difference in Indiana, to not just address traffic, but address a whole bunch of other problems that are all related to each other.
What I've noticed, because I live in a small town, well, near a
Mhm.
small town, near Trafalgar, Indiana,
Mhm.
near Martinsville,
Yeah.
Morgantown.
Mhm.
And the big issue is the teenagers have nothing to do. And they have to, if they're of driving age, they go to Franklin or
Yep.
they go to south side of Indy. They go
Yep.
down to Bloomington. I mean, yeah, we're in the middle of some major centers,
Mhm.
but it's not Martinsville. It's not Morgantown. It's not Trafalgar.
Yep. Yep. I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. People, the things that make a place, a home, a community, we have allowed to be outsourced, and to the detriment of our communities most often. And the lack of leadership and the lack of organization, helping people organize, helping people like see what is missing from the communities and how we can do something about it, is something that we have to do as leaders, as legislators. So,
Affordable housing is becoming a growing concern in communities like New Albany, Georgetown, Croydon. What specific actions will you take to address the housing shortage before it becomes a crisis?
well, not to split hairs, but I think we're fully in a crisis. It was a study I was reading last year that was describing how there are approximately 250,000 families in Indiana that are defined as extremely low income, ELI, which means that the household brings in, I believe it's $42,000 a year or less. And that for families in that income bracket, there are 3 affordable rental units for every 10 that need shelter. 3 for every 10 that need shelter. That is a crisis. And for those lucky 3, most of them are spending half of that income on the rent for that affordable unit. There are a number of things that we have to do to start addressing this crisis, and this is a big. This is one that is particularly close to me. I've told this story a couple times before that, like, when I moved to Southern Indiana 16 years ago, my wife and I got married and we lived in a one-bedroom apartment while she was finishing college. And that one-bedroom apartment cost us $580 a month plus utilities. It was just like 800 square feet. It was exactly what we needed. And we saved aggressively when I started working on the garbage truck. We saved for 3 years to put together a down payment. And at the end of that 3 years, we purchased our first home. We put a down payment on our first home that cost us $138,000. And in 2022, we sold that house. 2021, we sold that house. At the time that we sold our house, the same apartment in the same apartment building that we had rented for $580 was renting for about $1,200 a month. And the house that we bought in 2012 for $138,000, a little less than 10 years later, sold for double. And so if you took me, a high school grad, gave me the same job, wages have gone up a little bit at the garbage truck, but it hasn't doubled. And put me in the same situation, in the same apartment, looking for the same house, not a chance. Well, one, I'd be struggling to pay the rent, really struggling to pay rent. And two, I would be like, there's no way I would be able to, in 3 years, put aside savings for a down payment on a house like that. No possibility. And the things that would be in my income are the least available product on the market, because this past year because at the start of this year, we saw for the first half of the year, 1 in 3 single family homes in the country were purchased by hedge funds. 1 in 3. That is a crisis. So what do we do about it? There are a couple of things. The first thing we have to do is pass laws that ban the sale of single family homes to investment firms and hedge funds. Just straight up. We do not need families competing with billion-dollar hedge funds for housing. That's insane. We have to stop that. We can stop that. It's not that difficult to stop it. We just need legislators who recognize, help the community organize, and see who is stealing their power, who is stealing their access to wealth. And then when the community sees it and organizes, it happens. It happens. The couple other things we have to do, we have to help get red tape out of the way to open up housing again. A really, really great organization that I recommend to everybody is called Strong Towns. Strong Towns has done incredible work, especially after the housing crisis in places like Detroit, and a lot of communities, helping, especially municipalities, because a lot of this can be done at the municipal level. But there's elements of it at the state level that help change the law so that we can more quickly turn available housing and available lots into more dynamic housing. And one of the big things about this is helping organize people and see what's possible and see what we have to change. Because normally, if you say, hey, this neighborhood, we got to be a little bit more dynamic with it, people start getting worried. We don't want our neighborhoods to change. We don't want, a shop to go in on the corner. We don't want to see that big single family house, that was built for a millionaire in 1920 become something where 2 families live in it or 3 families live in it. And I get that. This is not about opening the floodgates to chaos. But the example that I use with people is a nursery can be kind of loud and chaotic. It's not always super peaceful, but it is thriving. It is full of life. It is full of potential. And it is a place where people can grow and develop, and it's happening. Cemeteries are extremely orderly. They don't change. They're very quiet and peaceful, and they're dead. They're dead, and people can't really live there. They are destined to not change and evolve. We're looking for a little bit of a middle path here between a nursery and a cemetery. We want to protect order in our neighborhoods. This isn't about opening the floodgates to chaos, but we have these big houses that there are laws against subdividing, and we have empty lots where financial products aren't available to build the starter home of the 1960s. The starter home of the 1960s was 900 square feet or smaller. Banks don't want to finance that kind of a product. That is not an attractive product to them because it's not expensive enough. There's not enough return on a mortgage for that kind of a build. There are so many laws against building a second unit on existing property where people like, well, I have a garage and I want to turn it into a second housing unit, or I don't have a garage and I want to build a tiny home back here, a 700 square foot full space that I could rent to my daughter and her husband, or I can rent to, my friend down the street who lost their house. We have to recognize that the way that suburbia was an experiment that has been shown to not work. It has failed us, and we have to embrace a little bit of the nursery while protecting a little bit of the cemetery to create a city where people and create communities where no one is unhoused. Because if the choice is between a cemetery and people living on the street and freezing outside, or a little bit more nursery, a little bit more unpredictability, buildings changing, things developing so that no one is sleeping on the street, people overwhelmingly recognize we have to be flexible with each other and we can still protect the beauty and integrity of our towns and our cities. Stop hedge funds from buying up single family homes, and also unlock our neighborhoods, unlock our towns, help get red tape, help get zoning laws opened up so that we can build dynamic housing that is actually affordable for people again. Because we can't have this binary choice between homelessness and a new build $400,000 house. Because right now, in many places, that's the choice. Because and we have to change that, and we can change that.
Yeah, it's funny going back to what you were saying about like your first place. My first house that I bought was in 2003. I was 23 years old. Bought my own house, $98,000. That, and I mean, mortgage was $580 a month. But when that house finally sold, well, hell, what it's worth now is $460,000. I mean, it's ridiculous how
Yes.
prices are going up.
Yes.
It is not a buyer's market, or yeah, it's not a buyer's market, it's a seller's market.
Mhm.
And they are
Mhm.
selling to who they can guarantee their money from. And right
Right.
now, that's the Berkshire Hathaways, that's the
Mhm.
American Home Network. That's
Yeah. Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
and
There's
they're
a big th
so
no, there's a bigger conversation to be had here, which is a whole show unto itself
mhm.
about having turned mortgages into the foundation of our financial market and the consequences that it's had, like the good intentions back in the 50s into the 60s that made that the case, and the consequences of turning housing into a financial product that always has to go up in value or the market collapses. There are solutions to that, but we have to organize and help people recognize what has created this moment we are in where everything is unaffordable, including houses, and the not easy, sometimes painful changes we're going to make housing about shelter and not about a financial product that always, always, always goes up in value, so that a house that sold for 98,000 in the 90s is now a $400,000 house, because that is not sustainable.
The Ohio River region continues to face environmental risk, including water quality concerns and industrial pollution. What environmental protections or regulatory changes would you support to protect District 47's air and water?
This is so important, especially with data centers being threatened at every turn. We have one going in Clark County right now outside of Jeffersonville, and there's fomenting of others out in Harrison in the surrounding areas. The most important thing, like we need, there's enforcement measures that keep getting cut back. There's transparency, which is always being fought. And of course, modernizing regulations that were written by the EPA in the early 90s and haven't been touched since because of the constant war against regulation. So one big initiative that we just need to reinvest in is the Ohio River Basin Restoration Initiative. That's an existing program that the funding keeps getting pulled out of because they don't want to actually fund environmental protections, which is the Democrats and progressives have frequently done a very bad job of communicating this to rural communities and to farmers. The inherent elitism that comes across in talking about climate change, for example, the looking with scorn at people whose actual lives are connected to the earth and to the change of the seasons, and treating them like hayseeds because they think they don't understand. That's not true. That's really, and it's really, the consequences of that can be seen in our current political environment. But helping people reconnect to the idea that it used to be the farming practice that you always asked, what does this look like 7 generations from now? If we reroute this creek, how will it impact the land 7 generations from now? And because power has been taken out of our communities and people have lost vision of the power they hold, so much seems inevitable, so much seems too complicated to understand. So the high levels of pollution in our soil and in our air and in our water, because you can go a decade without really feeling it, you can delude yourself into thinking that it's not really affecting you. That's not true anymore. We've had decades of the EPA being rolled back and its protections being cut, and the constantly falling water quality, air quality, and soil quality is being felt not just by people who live in the cities where kids are overwhelmingly suffering from respiratory conditions, where the quality of life and life expectancy is falling because of PFAS, persistent chemicals in the water. People are increasingly aware that we have been cheated, that someone has ripped us off and we are getting screwed. And it's difficult to see who. So I want to support the Ohio River Basin Restoration Act, which is all about cleaning up our river water sources. It's all about restoring monitoring for the big polluters and showing transparency in what they're actually putting into their waste streams. But economic and environmental protection are not like mutually exclusive. If we have really strong standards, we can both protect public health and long-term growth. And we see this, data centers are a great example of this. Data centers are being built the cheapest, dirtiest way possible in Indiana, and not because there aren't alternatives. We have clear examples in Europe where the data boom is happening too, of data centers that put clean, reused water back into the system. It's not pump and dump for cooling, where they're just using the water and dumping it and depleting aquifers, and nobody gets any benefit from it except a couple of servers. Where their excess heat, they're using it to create energy and put it back into homes and towns. It's more expensive, but it is inherently creating value for the community and raising the quality of living for the place where the data center is going in. And they are still profitable. They're just not sick, disgusting profits at the cost of polluting the community where it's built. And that's an example of how these things are not mutually exclusive. But our current legislators are just more than happy to roll over because they can put a line on their mailer that says, we created $6 billion in growth in our community. And it's a data center that's going to hire 30 people and suck all the water out of the aquifer. It's not like, so yeah, the basin restoration project is a really big one that we need to restore funding for. But also we just need to honestly, the people that are polluting Indiana have addresses. The businesses that are fighting any form of regulation for their waste streams, it's not a secret who they are and where their businesses are located. And when you can help organize the community that is the direct recipient of that pollution, you can change things. And that's what I'll do.
Public schools in District 47, particularly in Harrison and Washington counties, struggle with teacher retention and funding inequities. What is your plan to strengthen public education and keep quality educators in our classrooms?
Give them what they're due. And to do that, one thing we have to do is stop the nonsense with charter schools. Stop the nonsense with charter schools. It's absolutely fine if you want to start a private institution for education. You have a vision for educating kids. We understand that. That's great. If you want to do that in our state, you can be treated like other businesses. We're not giving charter schools public school dollars. Charter schools pick their students. They pick what kind of student they want, and they can deny anybody that they don't want in their classrooms. So inevitably, they tend to take the most able, the highest succeeding on test score students, and they take all of their money, take all the money for those students, and then leave public schools with the bulk of the students that have the most needs, require the most interventions, and as a result, are the most expensive students to educate. It burdens teachers, takes away resources for bringing in special educators, for bringing in mental health experts, for bringing in all the interventions that these high needs kids have, while siphoning the students and the money that goes with them to charter schools. And charter schools can say, look, our students are all super successful with that, and as though they didn't just skim the students they wanted while avoiding the difficult reality of educating every kid in Indiana and making sure no one in our state is neglected and has their needs denied. So fighting charter schools and the unlimited voucher program is huge. That returns millions and millions and millions of dollars to our school budgets. And so we can actually pay teachers and make teaching look attractive to them. We need to get rid of this asinine rule that they passed that requires teachers to prepare the entire year's curriculum in advance so that so that parents can decide 8 months in advance if they want their kid to learn this part of the teacher's plan, and then the teacher has to make a special plan for that kid. And you want to do that in Floyd County, in Harrison County, in Washington County, when across the river in Jefferson County, Kentucky, if they jump the river to Kentucky, they get a $10,000 pay raise immediately and don't have to deal with that kind of nonsense. For a state that prides itself on being smart about business, it is asinine and it is stupid. And our kids and our communities are the ones who suffer because high quality teachers who want to spend their lives working with kids and helping communities flourish are forced to choose between their families suffering and not having enough to get by or staying in the communities that they want to serve here in Indiana. And it is time to get rid. We can change that, and we can change it in a single legislative session. We can, without raising taxes, without doing anything else to our current budgets, we can bring tens of millions of dollars back to our school budgets just by ending the nonsense with charter schools, by acting like they are some special kind of business that deserves public money, by um, ending burdensome requirements on our teachers, like preparing a year's worth of curriculum in advance. These are things that would drive any professional away from a similar industry, and we stop doing it in hours for our teachers.
I interviewed Natasha Baker last week, 2 weeks ago, and her take on it was we don't have a shortage of teachers. We have a shortage of people wanting to become teachers
Mm,
because of one, pay, two, the restrictions, and three, the teachers are not seen how they used to be seen.
mhm,
Teachers used to be seen as, heroes.
mm.
They're teaching the youth of our nation.
Yep.
And I think we've gone away from that and we see heroes as, or at least kids see heroes as, I'm going to get some flack for this, but like Mendoza,
Mhm.
quarterback for IU, is
Yep.
a hero for them.
Yep.
Or, any basketball player, any baseball player, whatever.
Yep.
And it needs to come back to who are the real heroes in our society? It's the
Yep.
firefighters, it's the teachers, it's the good cops, it's, the military. Those are our true heroes, and we need to reteach that.
Yeah, restoring respect for teachers and taking them out of the culture war fight that they didn't ask to be put in the middle of so that people like my opponent can grandstand on putting the 10 commandments in their classroom instead of doing anything that actually helps the kids in that classroom. Yeah, we have to make those changes. We have to make those changes.
Small manufacturers, farmers, and local business owners form the backbone of the district's economy. What
Mhm.
policies would you champion to support rural economic development and help small business owners?
There are a number of really important things we have to do, and this actually I'm glad this follows the education question because expanding apprenticeship and vocational programs that are connected directly to high schools is something that we can do and we have to do. And there's actually a lot of bipartisan interest in this. But when you start talking about, okay, and that means we need to invest in building these vocational schools, we need to invest in creating these apprenticeship programs. Well, then it gets a little bit more iffy because, yeah, as one of my friends says, screw our courage to the sticking place. Yes, like we have to actually be willing to do what it takes to put these programs in place. That's a big part of it all by itself because we know that Gen Z, right? I believe that right now the median age of a home buyer is like 54 years old. And that's because of well, there's a lot of factors that obviously, but the job market for the youngest people that are coming into it right now is insane. It is absolutely upside down. The jobs aren't there. The training programs aren't there. Schools are being defunded. Programs like vocational apprenticeships keep disappearing. And so we need our leaders to actually organize. We need them to actually create the funds, to create the budgets, to build these programs so that kids have paths, have options to explore real jobs, real trades, and then we'll have have an actual workforce. That's part one. And the other part of it, I mentioned I was in Campbellsburg just this past week. Campbellsburg is home to MPP. It's a manufacturing and machining company. It's the main employer in Campbellsburg. It has been for decades. And every so often it gets bought by a new concern. And currently it's owned by a private equity company out of New York. The workers at Campbellsburg organized and won their union back in 2024, and they have been trying to negotiate a contract for over a year. They have not yet been able to negotiate a contract. It has been an incredible fight for them. They faced all the usual difficulties, intimidation, all the pushback from the owners. And even after they've won the union here a year on, they still are stuck with fighting the New York private equity firm that owns the company and is fighting their ability to organize and win the contracts for better pay, better working conditions, and better benefits. And not once has our current state senator come to help them, come to advocate for them, to speak on their behalf, to say these are the workers of District 47 and they deserve dignity and their fight needs to be blown up huge because the private equity firm out of New York does not see the people of Campbellsburg. MPP is a line on their portfolio. They own energy concerns in Pennsylvania. They own various other manufacturing and energy concerns around the country. And they have a private fund that was valued at over 1.7 billion. They buy these things low. They try to squeeze as much margin out of them as possible so then they can sell them to even richer people at a profit. And that's what they do. And that model does not take into consideration the people that have worked there for 20 years in the beating heart of Campbellsburg and what it takes to raise a family, what it costs to raise a family, what it costs. I was talking about tarps on the roof, like Campbellsburg, if you get out around there, you're going to see the impact of that squeeze. You're going to see the neglect of not standing with workers and not standing with communities to make sure that they get their fair share. And that is again about power. And when we have leaders, when we have representatives who recognize and identify with the fight of workers, with the fight of communities for the things that they need, for the things that they have earned, we can make real changes. And we make those jobs seem like a good idea for kids that are about to graduate high school. We show that there is a path to having a good life in your community, working with your neighbors in a factory that has defined generations here as an identity, as respectable work, as having dignity and value, and not being a line on a portfolio for a New York private equity firm that doesn't care. So between creating apprenticeships, between creating vocational opportunities to help actually train the next generation, we also then need to make those vocations as attractive as they should be. And that means standing with the people that are actually holding the line in manufacturing today, that are holding the line in these job markets today. And that, again, I mentioned it at the start, it's about organization. It's about showing people who has taken their power and showing them how to take their power back.
Indiana continues to face issues surrounding healthcare access, especially in rural counties where hospitals and specialist services are limited. How would you improve healthcare availability and affordability for residents of District 47?
Really appreciate this one. So there are the usual suspects: telehealth, mobile medicine. Like these are all important things that we do need to expand access to. But we have a bigger problem, and that's in District 47. There are two hospitals, in particular, Harrison County Hospital and Ascension St. Vincent Hospital in Washington County, that have both been fighting the fight to stay open and to stay out of the deep red for years. And with the new cuts to Medicaid reimbursements, the new cuts to Medicare reimbursements, they are facing very stark decisions and futures as we move into 2026. So, right out the gate, the immediate thing we have to do is roll back these cuts to Medicaid reimbursements. We have to stop acting like cutting people's access to healthcare is going to save us money in the long run, because it doesn't. Proven that over and over again. When people avoid seeking care because they fear the cost and they fear bankruptcy, they don't show up at the hospital until they are in crisis. And crisis to crisis to crisis is the most expensive way possible to do healthcare. And if we saw it with the Medicaid expansions, the states that moved quickest to expand Medicaid back when Obamacare was passed started seeing the benefits as people got care immediately and didn't have as many medical crises. With farmers who, like, there was a specific example out of North Carolina where a farmer had a leg wound and he avoided going in because he didn't have insurance and he wanted to keep working and he was afraid how much it would cost. And by the time he went in, he almost lost that leg. And it took months of therapy and of treatment to save his leg. And if he'd lost his leg, he would have lost his farm and he would have lost everything. And that was all directly because of how expensive healthcare is. So getting rid of these cuts to Medicaid reimbursements, getting rid of these cuts to Medicare reimbursements not only helps these hospitals stay in the black, but it also makes it possible for people to get care when they need it, and that drives the price of healthcare down. And that's really, really, we got to do that.
The district has seen an increase in severe weather events and flood risk concerns along the Ohio River. What
Yep.
steps should the legislature take to improve emergency preparedness and climate resilience for your region?
Absolutely. We have to expand state grants for flood mitigation. We saw the third highest flood since records have been kept I believe in the last year on the Ohio River. Since records have been kept, we know that it's going to get worse, and we cannot keep like doing legislation by the ostrich method of being like, well, maybe it won't. We need to be proactive to protect to protect the communities along the Ohio River, and that means taking real steps to create grants that will allow us to do better flood mitigation. We have to strengthen emergency management capacity, because we know that these emergencies are coming. So again, there are a lot of communities in Otisco and in Mockport and all through these counties. They're very familiar with living on the Ohio River. What we need is people in the state legislature that aren't making decisions from Indianapolis, but are making sure we are with the volunteer fire departments, that we are helping the community organize and identify the weak points so we can actually do these grants in a smart way that concretely fits with what they're already experiencing, what we already know in our local communities. Again, like, it's about power. When you empower people and help them organize, they will do the best job making sure that the funds that come into the community are used where they need it, and you can actually work together.
Many Hoosiers in this district feel disconnected from state politics and want more accountability. What reforms do you support to increase transparency, ethics, and public trust in Indiana state government?
Transparency, transparency, transparency. We need like they cut the public funding for Indiana. Oh gosh, it's escaping me right now. We had public broadcasting here in Indiana. It was part of public radio, and they cut the funds for it completely this past year, so that every reporter that actually worked at making sure that the news from the Capitol and the legislature was getting out, they've all lost their jobs overnight. The actual conduct within the Senate is difficult to follow. It's not well reported and it's not well broadcast. So we need to increase transparency, which means more advanced public notice and disclosure for all major legislation. Like, that you can't just put this bill in a week before, get it passed through committee, and then it gets a vote the following day and no one even knew what happened. We need laws that actually say, if you're making changes to this, you have to have weeks for public review and comment. You can't just jam laws on the people because you are hoodwinking them into saying that you're serving their interests. You have to let them see and weigh in on it. So that's a big one. We need to strengthen ethics rules. around lobbying and conflicts of interest. We saw the Indiana Economic Development Corporation give away $80 million to insiders over the last few years and no bid contracts. We have to strengthen our ethics laws around that. And the other thing we have to do, one more, independent redistricting, obviously. We've already seen that, and Hoosiers overwhelmingly support it. We don't want partisan redistricting anymore, not just in the country. We want it for the whole country, but we can start here in Indiana. And then also, just personally, when I am not in a legislative session, I will be holding at least one town hall a month all over the district in public places with lots of public notice, so that it's not a question of will he return my call? Can I get a response to this letter? Come talk to me. I will be in Washington County. I will be in Harrison County. I will be in Floyd County. We can talk and you can get representation. And hopefully I'm doing that already as a candidate, but that's also something that I can model and make by force of example something that gets replicated around the state more.
District 47 sits at the crossroads of multiple major issues: rural decline, suburban growth, opioid addiction, infrastructure strain, and economic transition. What is your overall long term vision for this district, and what measurable goals would you set for your first term?
There are a lot of issues, like you mentioned. Some of the big ones for me that I'm focusing on because I know that these are things that I can get bipartisan action on and that I think will immediately impact people's lives. One is getting rid of the sales tax on utilities. And so immediately giving every Hoosier a 7% savings on their utilities. It's not a lot, but it's something that I am confident we can get done. Eliminating reconnection fees on utilities so that people who are already struggling don't have to pay extra because they're struggling. It's just a tax on the poor and it's nonsense. We need to make it so that medical debt does not count against your credit score, which is something that we absolutely can do. We need to cap the cost of insulin at $35 a month per user, which we absolutely can do. And then more broadly, I have some priorities like creating a domestic violence registry in Indiana. They passed it in Tennessee just here this past year. Indiana consistently ranks in the top 5 states in the country for domestic abuse. And people who commit domestic abuse, up to on average, 60% will reoffend, will commit domestic abuse again within 2 years. And it's easy to hide. It's easy to get away with. And so, as a starting point to addressing this crisis, we want to create a domestic violence registry where if you reoffend, you end up on a registry so that future partners, employers, communities, you will not be able to hide. Because what we know about domestic abuse is it is not because people lose control of their emotions and make a mistake. It is people who like to choose violence because it gives them the easiest result for what they want. And they feel one of the big things they found out of the Gender Violence Institute in Minnesota, one of the big motives is you can isolate your partner and you can rewrite the story and tell it however you want. And with the domestic violence registry, we are taking that incentive away and saying, you will not be able to rewrite this story and lie to the next person and lie to the next community. You will be known for what you have done. There is a path out of it. There is a path to get off of it, but not without court-appointed therapy and a long-term no repeats of domestic abuse. So those are some of my big priorities. There are a lot of them that we have. We could spend another hour probably getting into these, but those are some big ones that I am confident we can do something about to legislative session one, and something that I can do a good job organizing everybody in District 47 over, because every issue that I want to hit on is not, I am highlighting this over and over again. This is not a left right thing. This is a bottom top thing. This is about power that has been stolen and how to help our community recognize how they have been cheated and ripped off, and how we can organize and take power back. And that when we do, we will get better wages. We will get better infrastructure. We will get better flood protection, and we will hold the abusers of our community, be they domestic, be they corporate, be they political, we can hold them accountable.
All right, Ethan, you've handled the big questions: infrastructure, schools, healthcare, the whole District 47 playbook. But now it's time to find out how you handle the heat when there's no script, no prep, and no time to think. This is the
So
part of the show where politicians either shine or show us exactly why they shouldn't be trusted with a
let's
pair of
go.
scissors, let alone a Senate seat. Welcome to Hold'em or Fold'em, the lightning round where your instincts get tested, your honesty gets exposed, and your campaign managers start sweating. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Let's deal the cards. Rural broadband expansion paid for by the state, even if it means stepping on the toes of big telecom companies.
Hold.
Creating a state fund to repair and modernize roads in Harrison and Washington counties before spending any money in Indianapolis.
Hold.
Increasing teacher pay in District 47 schools, even if it means cutting tax breaks for big corporations.
Hold.
Creating a statewide task force dedicated to teaching people that using your blinker is not, in fact, a sign of weakness.
I'm taking everyone's cards. I'm holding all of them.
Putting real penalties in place for polluters dumping into the Ohio River. No more
Hold.
slaps on the wrist.
Hold.
A state level program to help small towns like Salem, Corydon, and Palmyra revitalize their main streets.
Hold.
Requiring candidates to prove they actually shop local by surviving one entire afternoon in the Salem or Corydon Walmart without losing the will to live.
Hold.
Expanding mental health services in rural counties through mobile clinics and satellite offices.
Hold.
Forcing every Indiana legislator to spend one full day using rural internet speeds before they're allowed to vote on broadband policy.
I'm bringing you onto my policy team. Hold.
Supporting term limits for Indiana legislators, including yourself.
Hold.
Ethan, thank you for joining us today. Whether folks agree with every policy you laid out or not, one thing is clear. You showed up with honesty and a willingness to talk about the real issues facing Harrison, Washington, and Floyd counties. And that alone puts you ahead of a whole lot of people who claim to represent this district. This district deserves leaders who understand what's actually happening on the ground, from rural broadband dead zones to struggling school systems to the economic squeeze hitting families in small towns across the region. These aren't theoretical problems, and today's conversation made it clear. Voters here deserve answers, not rehearsed talking points. So thank you, Ethan, for taking the time, taking the heat, and taking on the Hold'em or Fold'em round without running for the exit. You're welcome back anytime. And to everyone watching, this district's future is shaped by the people who show up, not just the ones who ask for your vote. So as always, stay informed, ask questions, and hold them accountable.